In this video, I'm going to show you how to build your own n8n custom node from scratch. If you haven't built a custom node before, don't worry, I will show you the whole process from beginning to the end. And at the end of this video, you will have built your own n8n custom node that generates quotes by a click of a button. So let's dive in and start building this. We'll start by going to GitHub to download the n8n custom node starter template. So go over to github.com/n8n-io/n8n-nodes-starter. I will also leave a link to this in the description below. Now to download this, click on this green button here and copy this URL. I'm gonna be installing this or downloading and installing this with Git. If you don't have Git installed or don't know what Git is, you can also download this by clicking on this download zip here, and then you will get the zip folder that you can extract. Since I will be using Git, I will open up my terminal. I will change directory into my desktop. And here I'm going to download the starter template by doing git clone and pasting in the URL. It has now been downloaded. If you didn't use Git and choose the manual way, just extract the directory. Now I'm going to open up Visual Studio Code. I'm going to go to File and click on Open Folder. I'm going to select my n8n Nodes starter template, click on Open. Now let's open up the main file of the starter template, which is this file here, example.ts. Here you can see that we have our node. It's called example node, and the display name of the node is example node. Now this is important to know to find this inside of n8n. Now since the biggest hurdle I found with starting to develop custom nodes is to actually get your development environment set up correctly and get your node into n8n, I will show you how to do that first. If you go over to the n8n documentation, you will find a tutorial here that shows you how to build a declarative style node. This is a very good reference to use later when you need to build your own nodes. I'm going to scroll down to the bottom here where there's a section that shows you how to set up your nodes in n8n. So here on the test your node, it shows you how you can test your node inside of n8n. The problem with this is that it is based on an older version of n8n when n8n was using npm. n8n is currently using pnpm, and if you try to follow these instructions here, you're going to run into a lot of errors and it's not going to work. If you go over to the n8n community forums, you will find discussions around this matter and people offering different workarounds. I will show you my preferred workaround, which I believe is the simplest because it gives you full control over the process and understanding in detail of what is going on. So how the workaround works is we'll be using a script to manually copy our node code into the directory inside of the n8n container where it expects to find the node so it can be imported into n8n. And this whole process, including restarting n8n afterwards, is done by the script. So whenever we make a change to our code, all we have to do is run the script and then we can find the updated version of our node inside of n8n. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code. Here I'm going to open up a terminal and copy over my script to this project. I have not copied over the script, but I see that I was inside the example node folder here. So the script was copied into the example node folder, which is wrong. It should be here outside in the root directory. So let's copy or move it outside. Now the script there where it's supposed to be. So let's open this up and have a look. So this is how the script works. First, it's gonna set the name for the node based on the name in this package.json file over here. So the name is this name in here, which you will set yourself. Let's give this a name now while we're at it and call it example node. Now let's go back to the script. So it will take that name from the package.json file and set it to the variable package name. Then we will be setting a target directory, and the target directory here is the directory where we will copy our node to. So that is from where the node will be imported into n8n. Now I assume that you're using Docker for n8n, and if you do, you're gonna need to move your node code to the volume, the Docker volume, and from there into n8n. So first I will start by showing you where inside of n8n we need to add our code. So I will open up a terminal and I will execute a shell inside of my n8n container. First I will do docker ps to see my containers. Here I see that the name of my n8n container is n8n. So I'm going to use that and do docker exec-it n8n, the container name, bin sh. I have now opened a shell inside of the n8n container, and here I'm going to cd into home node.n8n. Inside of this .n8n directory, we will have a custom directory. If you don't have one, you will create one. And inside of this custom directory, that is where we will add the directory of our custom node. If you don't find a custom directory inside of there, you can create one by doing make there custom. Since I already have one, I'm not going to do that. So now let's go back and have a look at our script file. Now for this whole system to work, everything needs to be mapped correctly. So the underscore data directory here needs to be mapped to your .n8n directory inside of your Docker container. So I'm going to open up my Docker Compose file. And inside my Docker Compose file here, you can see that under volumes, the n8n storage volume, which is the default volume for storing n8n data, is mapped to home/node/.n8n. So this part here is the directory inside of the Docker container, and this directory here inside of the Docker container is mapped to the n8n storage volume. If you go back here, you'll see that the path to the n8n storage volume, in my case, I'm on Linux, the path to the n8n storage volume is this part. So where did I get this name for the volume from? To do that, to get this name, you will open up a terminal and type docker volume ls, and here you will see all your Docker volumes, and here you will also find the name for your n8n volume. So if you find a different name here for your n8n volume, take that name and replace this part here with the name for your volume. Now the next part of the script here is that it will run pnpn1 build. What this does is it takes our custom node code that is written in TypeScript, as you can see in this file here, and it compiles it into JavaScript so that it can be imported and used by n8n. And the directory where you will find the build output, the compiled JavaScript, is ./dist. It does not exist here yet, but after we run the script for the first time, it will pop up here with our JavaScript code that will be used by n8n. At the next step here, it will start by removing the target directory, the directory for our code node that is already in the volume, in other words, our previous version, and then it will make a new clean directory where we will insert our new code, our updated code. And then we will copy our code, our compiled code from the dist folder, our compiled JavaScript code, to the new directory inside of the n8n container. After that, we're going to run a docker container restart n8n command here to restart n8n, and then docker logs here to show us logs in the terminal. And then we should be able to see our node inside of n8n. So let's try that out now. First, I will be closing down this terminal because we're in the wrong directory. And now I will be opening up a new terminal. As you can see, it's in n8n-nodes-starter, which is the root directory here. This is very important, otherwise it won't work. And here I'm now going to execute the script. The script is now executing, and we get this error. It says that local package.json exists, but node modules is missing. So we need to install the package.json. To do that, we'll do pnpm install. Now that all dependencies have been installed, let's run the script again. You can see that now the script is running. It now asks me for a password because one of the commands inside of the script requires root privileges. So I'm going to type in my password, and it is now restarting n8n. Now I'm going to go over to n8n and refresh the page. And if we search for example here, we should now find the example node. Just click on that. And now here we have our node. Now if we go back to our terminal, where we're executing a shell inside of the n8n container and do ls custom, we will now find our new node here that we just added, the n8n nodes and this gibberish. The reason is that we have not changed the package name, so let's go back and do that. So inside of Visual Studio Code, go over to package.json. Now I see I actually did change the package name, but I have probably not saved the file after doing that. So always make sure to save your files after making any changes. So I'm now going to save the file. And now let's redeploy it again by running the script again. Now I'm going to go over to n8n again, refresh. And now if we check the custom directory inside of our container again, we'll see that we now have a new package here with the correct package name. So we can just go and delete this one. And in order to delete it, I'm going to copy this path. I'm going to open up a new terminal and do rm, and then I'm going to append the custom node name, or the custom node package name, like so. This requires sudo privileges, so I'm going to do sudo, and it is now deleted. So if you go back here and do list custom, you see that I actually deleted the wrong package. This was what I wanted to delete. So let's do that again. Let's copy this now instead. Let's run the same command, but change the name to the actual package I want to delete. Execute this. Now let's go back. Now let's go back to our other terminal. And inside of the container, let's do a custom again. And now we have deleted everything. So let's now redeploy it, run the deploy node script. Let's go over to n8n here and refresh the page. I'm going to search for example, and you find our example node here. And if you go and open up a new shell inside of the container and look for the package there, we will find it then. So now I'm going to list all the packages inside of custom, and you see that we now have our n8n nodes example node here. So now we have finished the process of getting our development environment set up correctly so that we can iterate on our node. Now it's actually time to start building our node. What we're going to be building is a random quote generator, and we're going to be using this dummy JSON API to generate random quotes. So let's start by preparing the code and go back to Visual Studio Code. So the first thing we're going to do here is go over to our files and remove all the unnecessary files. So first, let's start by removing this whole HTTP bin directory. We're not going to need that. And go over to the credentials as well and remove both of these. We're not going to need them as well because this API does not require any credentials. Now we're going to go into our code file here and update the names for things. So first, let's change the name from example node to random quote, and I'm going to change this to random quote, change this as well. The group here is for defining what category this node belongs to. It is not necessary, so I'm going to leave it out. Just remove this part and leave an empty array. And here we can set a description for the node. I'm going to type random quote generator, and the default name is going to be random quote. And here in properties, we're not going to need this. We're going to define our own. So we're going to delete this and scroll down a little bit more. And here you see we have some code. This is just required for when developing a programmatic node. We don't need to do that. We're going to develop a declarative node. So we're going to delete this whole function like that. Let's delete these comments as well. And now you see that we get this squiggly yellow line here because we no longer need imports. We're not using those anymore, so delete those as well. So now we have the base for our node. Let's go over to the package.json file. And here, let's change the package name and it a node quote or random quote. And this part here, if you're gonna upload your node to npm so it can be used as a community node for n8n, you want to keep this keyword here. Otherwise, n8n won't be able to recognize your node as a community. Now here, I don't have a home page for this node, so I'm just going to delete this. Author, if you want to add this, you can add it. It's not necessary, so I'm going to delete this here as well. If you're going to be using a GitHub repository for the node, you can leave this and change the URL here to your GitHub repository. Otherwise, you can delete this as well. Now let's scroll down here, and here is the important part. Since we have removed the credentials and we're not going to be using them, we're going to delete these two. But we need to leave this property here, otherwise it's not going to work according to my experience. And for the nodes, we now only have one node, so we're going to delete this HTTP bin and delete that comma. And we also need to change the name of the node here to match our node. So we called our node random quote, so let's change this to random quote. And example node should be random quote as well. So this is the name of the node file, and this is the directory over here. So we're going to need to change the name of the directory and the node, both of them here. And this as well, I'm going to change this to random quote. I realized I made a mistake here in the naming, so I changed that now so everything is correct, or no, not here, random quote. It is very important that the naming of everything is exact and precise, otherwise it won't work and you will get errors. Now that we have cleaned up the code and renamed everything, it's now time to start building the node. And when building a custom node, it revolves around two main concepts, resources and operations. To understand what I'm talking about, we're going to go back to n8n. And here I'm going to show you a quick demonstration. So let's take just an arbitrary node, for example, the Gmail node. Click on that. And now here you see that we have this resource title here, and we have choices here. So a resource is basically the thing in the API that you're going to work on, that you're going to make operations on. So for example, here we can have a message. It could be a resource. So we can maybe upload a message, send a message, delete a message. And for each resource, as you see here, message, label, etc., you have operations, which in this case could be delete, get many, and so on. So that is the difference between a resource and an operation and how they are related to each other. And when building n8n custom nodes, basically everything is about resources and operations. Now let's go back to Visual Studio Code. And now we're going to add our first resource. So let's go over to the documentation. And here we're going to start by setting the request defaults. So let's copy this, go back here. and let's paste it in here under outputs, like so. The base URL here refers to the base URL of the API we're going to be using. So it's going to be the part that is not going to change depending on the endpoints that we're going to be using. So if you go back to the API page here, the base URL will be this part. The rest, the quotes random part here, can change depending on the endpoint. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code and paste it in here like that. So this is going to be the base URL. For the headers, we're going to be receiving JSON in this case, so we can leave this as is. Now let's go back to the documentation and get some boilerplate for our first resource. So this is what a resource looks like inside the code. Let's copy this part and go back here. And inside of properties, we're going to paste it in here. So you see here that it says display name resource. If we go back here, it refers to this name here. So display name is this name. And under name here, you see it says resource as well with lowercase. This is the internal name to refer to this resource inside of the code. This is not what we will be seeing inside of n8n, but what we will be dealing with inside of the code. And then we have the type here, which has options. This means that we will get a list of options to choose between. To understand what types are and what types are available, you can come over to this page here in the reference UI elements, and you will see all the different types. So you got the string type, which will give you something like this, where you can enter a string. You got the password type that will let you enter a password, description type, for example, number type, date time, which lets you select the date from a date picker, and a lot of other types here. And the type we're going to be using is this options type, and it will give us a list like this, just like you saw inside of n8n. Now this note data expression or no data expression variable here determines if we're going to have, or determines if this resource is, you can deal with it as an expression instead of just a static string. So if you go back to n8n here, you see that you don't have the option to select expression here. And that is because this is set as true. If this was set as false, you would have the option to select the expression there. And by expression, I mean this option here. Instead of fixed, you will also be able to select expression. You've probably seen this before in other nodes. And here inside of options, we're going to set our different resources. We're just going to have one resource. So I'm going to delete the second one. And here I'm going to set our only resource. I'm going to call this random quote, and the value I'm also going to set that to random quote. And here is the default resource, which is also going to be random quote. Now instead of using Gmail as an example, let's deploy our own node and have a look at it. So the node has now been deployed, and let's go back and refresh. Now I'm going to search for the node. It's called random quote. Click on that, and you see that we now have our one and only resource, and it's called random quote. So what's left now is to start adding operations and actually do things with the resource. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code. So inside of the properties array, but below our resources, we're going to add our operations. So I'm going to go over to the documentation and get some boilerplate here for our operations. I'm only going to use one operation, so I'm going to copy this part here and go back down here and paste this below here, below our resource, like that. The display name is going to be operation. The name is going to be operation. Type is going to be options. No data expression, leave that true as well. Now display options here defines for what resources this operation will be an option. Now we only have one resource in any case, but we're going to set this as that anyway. Random quote. This becomes important if you have many resources and operations and you only want some operations for some resources and not all operations for all resources. In that case, you would define that. For each operation, you would define which resource that operation should be applied to. And here we will set the name of the operation, get here, because we're going to get a random quote. So we can leave that as so. Leave the value as get as well. Action, let's tell it get, that it says get a random quote. And description, I'm gonna set that to the same, get a random quote. And here under routing and request, we will define what endpoint we will be calling with this operation. Here is the method of the endpoint. Now I know that this is a get request, so I'm gonna leave this as get. And then we're gonna add the endpoint URL. If you go back here to the dummy.json API documentation, you can see that the endpoint is quotes/random, which will be appended to the base URL which we added before, dummyjson.com. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code, and here let's change this to quotes/random. And then here we're going to set our default operation, which is this one. We only have one, but if you have more operations, you can also choose the default operation that's going to be shown in the node. Now let's redeploy this and go back and test this in n8n. So I've now redeployed it and it's time to test it. Let's see what we get. I'm gonna refresh the page, gonna search for the node, random quote, and you see we now also have an operation, a get operation, get a random quote. Let's test this step. And you can see we now got a random quote here. My view is that a younger age optimism is more than blah, blah, blah. Let's test this again. And we now get a new quote. My toughest opponent has always been me. So that is basically it for this tutorial. If you want to learn more, you can go over to the documentation. There's a lot of different other things you can also add. You can add an icon to your node. And you can also add more operations, such as operations for the rest of the endpoints in the API, and multiple resources as well. And there's a lot of other things you can do. So if you want to do whatever you want to do and learn about, come over to the documentation here and you will find something. If you have any questions about custom nodes and tutorial, please leave a comment in the comment section and I will try to respond as quick as possible. And if you like this video, please leave a like, subscribe for more videos like this. And until next time, have a nice day.